pray. Pray about it. I used to pray all the time, Lord, please give me a better sex drive. I need a sex drive. It's okay to pray about things. If your arm was broken, you'd pray about that. I have gotten to the point I'll pretty much try anything once. Mm-hmm. And if I don't like it, then that's the last time.
Exactly.
And don't get so serious about it. If you try something, it doesn't work, or you don't like it.
We've laughed.
We have started laughing in the middle of us. Okay, this is over. The mood is gone.
I couldn't bend that way. Something like that.
We're too old for that.
Yeah,
exactly. And sex should be fun.
Welcome to The Orange Room. This is a podcast designed to facilitate conversations about real life. Well, welcome back to the Orange Room podcast. We are in week 4 of our Family Matters series, and we got a good one today. But first, I want to introduce our guests with us. We have Darren and Lavina Wyatt. Welcome to the Orange Room. We have Pastor Steve and Pastor Marty. Darren and Lavina have been coming to Real Life for how long now?
About 18 years.
18 years. They're some of our elders, also small group leaders. Trusty, amazing people. Mm-hmm. And then we know Pastor Steve and we know Pastor Marty. Thank you
As
again.
well as they also oversaw our couples ministry for several years.
Yes, they did.
Come on. Yeah. Another thing.
Right.
Hey, so today we're talking about sex. Mm-hmm. And I want to go ahead and take a time to make a disclaimer real quick. We're going to be speaking about some sensitive things today. And so if you're listening with maybe a child or somebody you don't think it's age appropriate for them to be hearing about things like this, now would be a good time to maybe pause the podcast, escort them out of the room, because we're about to get right into it. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, here we go. I feel good. I'm not uncomfortable at all. All right, so let's just get right into the questions that have been submitted this week. Let's start here. The first one is, what are your thoughts on couples sleeping in different rooms? And what they add here is, hey, my spouse snores, and it's hard for me to sleep with them in the room. And so we can kind of address maybe that part of it. And then if you want to go into detail about maybe the effects of sleeping in different rooms in general.
Well, I think generally speaking, the sleeping in different rooms in and of itself is separate, because what you don't want anything like that to occur is what are the unintended consequences? Intimacy, sex. Not everyone has sex when they go to bed. There are different times in the day. So I have firsthand knowledge of that's like, because my lovely bride here, she does snore quite a bit. And I've learned to adapt, because I didn't want to sleep in separate rooms.
Well, but I offered.
Yeah.
And this is the thing.
True.
He was not sleeping well. And I tried the strips. And I just snored. I said, honey, I'll sleep in another room. And for a couple nights, at least you can have a couple good nights. And he was like, no, I don't want that to start. But it's frustrating when you're the one that snores.
Because you can't help it.
I can't help it. I tried everything I knew. So I wanted him to get sleep, but he didn't want that. So actually prayer is what.
Prayer helped a lot. But I also adapted how I sleep. I was sleeping more on my side with the pillow and everything. So if it's just about the snoring, I think there are things that maybe can continue to be worked on, that you talk. It's all about communication. Yeah. You have to talk. But if they can't work anything out, then you have to be very, very intentional on the intimacy side, because it's very easy. 2 rooms, 2 separate lives, you start growing apart. Mm-hmm. And you can't have that. So that has to be intentional in something like that.
And I would also say that if that's the case and separate rooms are necessary, what's wrong with you spend, if you watch TV or maybe you read a book or spend time talking before you go to bed, have that moment. Intimacy is not just sex, it's having that moment together.
That's right.
And then when it's time to turn off the lights and go to bed, love you, baby. I'm going to the room or whatever you need to do.
That's
But I understand the whole sleep thing. And sometimes you can make some adjustments here. I would just say this. You don't want two rooms to be something where it robs you of intimacy, sexual intimacy. You want to keep that intact, and you never want to sacrifice that moment that you and your spouse have. So bedroom, sleep, or bedroom communication, talk. And if you need to sleep in separate bedrooms, that's okay.
Pastor Marty, anything to add there?
I have something very practical. I sleep with earplugs now. And I found some that really work good. If you want to know, I can send you a link. That's all I got to say about
we'll
it.
drop the link in the,
In the
very
comments.
good. Okay, so here's maybe a different direction for this. So I know that we talked about here, because I can't sleep, how that could maybe affect our intimacy with our spouse, being in different rooms. Another question that we have is, how do I fight for intimacy? How do I keep intimacy alive during conflict? So maybe it's not, hey, because he's snoring, I want to sleep in different rooms. I don't want to be around them.
I think with that, the root cause is the whatever trouble is going on. So you have to deal with whatever the issue is that's making you not want to be in the same room with the person. So it boils down to both of you being willing to talk it out, not get defensive, because a lot of times, especially if it's something that I'm doing that's annoying my spouse, it's not enjoyable to hear that. However, a mature person is going to be teachable and listen and say, okay, if this is how my spouse is feeling, I don't feel that way. And maybe I don't even believe it. But if my spouse is feeling that way, I have to take that into consideration and listen and be willing to discuss without becoming defensive.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, intimacy and sex is part of the symptom of whatever's going on. The relationship, the emotional side of the relationship is what's driving the lack of intimacy. So that has to be dealt with first. And just like Lavina said, you've got to be willing to talk. You can't be passive aggressive.
Yep.
You have to be able to hit it head on. You married this person, you love this person, and hopefully you believe they're a good-willed person.
Yeah.
So you can go through and get those things worked out. Then some of the other things will start to take care of themselves.
And I think too, it's obvious, but conflict will rob you of intimacy.
That's right.
I never want to be intimate, and I don't mean just sexual, but whenever I'm upset with Marty, I don't want to talk to her. We're not best buds. I don't want to hang out. I stiff arm her, keep my distance from her. And so that's not healthy, by the way. But sometimes what I've done is we've allowed conflict or this state of frustration that I may be in to kind of go longer than it needs to. And that's never healthy for a relationship. So conflict versus intimacy. Obviously, there has to be a resolving of conflict. Not that we'll resolve conflict and never deal with it again. We've got to learn to walk through and navigate conflict, but yet not allowing that to rob us of our wrong person. To rob us of our connection. And because at the end of the day, the enemy would love to get a foothold, and he'll do it however he wants to do it. So for me, it's like I'm frustrated with Marty. Certainly don't want to be intimate, don't want to talk. And that has to be resolved. And you have to be willing to move on, because you can't have healthy intimacy and connection, let me say, with our spouse when there's conflict and there's unresolved issues in our marriage, which goes back to communication,
That's right.
right?
And oftentimes men have a tendency to stonewall. And that's really what it is.
Yeah.
You just put up a wall. You're not going to do it, because oftentimes they hold it in because they feel like, oh, I don't want to yell, don't want to say anything, but they're not dealing with the issue. It's just like you said, stewing and until a point that all of a sudden it comes out in ways that are very harmful to the relationship.
Yeah, and when that happens, then the wife feels rejected and abandoned and left alone to deal with whatever the situation is. If she can't communicate with him because he's stonewalling, then she's alone. And this is a partnership. She's not supposed to be alone. And of course, it goes either way. The wife should never stonewall her husband as well. And the thing with fighting, once your defenses go up in a fight, you need to stop, because nothing gets through those defenses. Once we get feel like we have to defend ourselves, we're no longer listening.
Good.
And so if you are feeling defensive over a conflict, you need to take a time out. You need to give yourself a few minutes because you don't hear your partner when you're defensive. So you can't let those walls go up. If they do, you got to stop because nothing is going to be fixed in that.
And one of the things too we found in any type of disagreement, it's very easy for someone to say, you did this or you said this. But a better way that we found to keep the defenses down, it says, when you say this or when you do this, this is how it makes me feel.
Good.
So you're taking away, not accusing them of anything. You're letting them know how you feel about what's going on. And that helps keep some of that defensive and putting your guard up down a little bit.
Yeah, Darren, really good. Okay, so here's another question. They say, I'm introverted. My spouse is extroverted, and it affects our intimacy. How do we navigate?
But there-
We're that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's every couple because opposites attract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think the extrovert is going to be more verbal, maybe more handsy.
Physical, yeah.
Physical.
Probably
And
initiate more.
initiate more, absolutely. But an extrovert should not look at their introverted spouse as not loving and not caring and not desiring. They can't put their emotions and feelings onto the introvert.
Good.
Because we think completely differently. We don't think the same. We don't feel the same. And so if we don't respond the way you would respond, that doesn't mean that we're not feeling.
Right.
We just feel and respond differently. So knowing that and talking that out is a good way to start understanding each other in intimacy.
Yeah, and you have to be careful because if you start making comments like that, you're attacking at someone at the level of who they are.
Who God
Their
created them to
personality.
be.
God created them to be a certain way and all that. So those are the types of hurts that they don't easily get over.
Right.
So you have to think about it. It's two sides of a coin. It's different, but that's okay. But you work out as a couple.
Right.
How does it work for us? Because I do think opposites attract. And because of that, this way, you two are similar that
Yes.
way. It just happens that way.
And I think just studying your mate, I don't think we do that early on. I didn't do it until the last few years. You have kids and you're just trying to live. You're just
That's right.
trying to get them fed and through the day. But when we became empty nesters, I really had to study again, Steve. I knew him when we were dating and when we first got married, but as life got crazy, I had to appreciate the differences and not get frustrated with them. And you have to ask God, show me, because there are things that He completes in me. He's great at some things that I'm not good at, and vice versa. And so, really appreciating who they are, not trying to change them.
That's right.
Why would I try to change him? I love the things that drive me crazy about him to an extent, But so I do. I think most couples are opposite, and you have to appreciate the differences and learn to love those. So
I think it's great. I think that that takes you a while to do,
it has to be intentional.
to really come to a place where I appreciate and value how God uniquely made you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of any relationship, especially for those of us who've been married for a long time and have studied our spouse, as you say, where this is not about a competition. It's not about my way or your way. It is about us coming together and understanding that you see things that I don't see.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And that's a beautiful thing. So the introvert, extrovert, and let's just say this, whenever it comes to intimacy and sex, it's those who may have a high libido versus those that have a low libido, whatever. It's amazing how much you have in common when you're dating. And then when you're married,
Exactly.
you're like, we're this different? Yeah, you married the same person. Nothing's changed. You just were blind when you went into the relationship. So I think there is a lot to be said about appreciation of how God uniquely made you. And I'm gonna embrace who you are. Do we need to change? Of course, there's some things we need to change and make adjustments. But at the end of the day, God never called me to change my spouse. God called me to appreciate and value who He gave me as a gift. So I think that's important.
That's right. And it's
Wonderful.
something I've always said is when God created man, He created Adam and they said, let us make him in our image. But then when He made woman, He took a part of Adam out and gave that to the woman. So Adam is not complete without Eve. So when you think of a couple coming together, the image of God, she has abilities I don't have. She has strengths I don't have. God knew where my weaknesses were and put her in here because those are her strengths and vice versa. And he does it with everyone. So we just have to remember she's here to help me. I'm here to help her. And the two, it's a tough bond to break when you think about the Lord being in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Good.
Come on. Well, Pastor, you mentioned maybe a supercharged libido when dating. Here's a question, and it's from the perspective of a young adult that is dating or engaged. And they said, when you're in that time it's an extended amount of time before marriage, how do you navigate needs for intimacy and connection in a godly way? And then the other question is it good to live with a person before marriage to make sure that they're compatible?
The need for intimacy, keyword there, intimacy and connection is important. Sex is not necessary for intimacy outside of the bounds of marriage. So I think as it relates to that question, I think that you can have a pure, God-honoring relationship and still have a level of connection and intimacy there when you're dating.
Good.
So again, you don't know unless you're really drilling down and know the ins and outs of this unique story, but I would say this, you can still establish and create an atmosphere of connection and intimacy while you're dating in the context of a dating relationship and in the confines of a Christ-honoring relationship. The second part of that question was what, Chris?
Can you live with
Can you
someone?
live with, should you recommend
Is it
living
good to live with someone just to make sure that you're compatible?
Yeah, and I would say that's not healthy. And one of the reasons why is because, well, let's think about it. A lot of people do that today because they do want to take it for a trial run, kind of test it out, right?
Yeah.
It's like before you buy a car, you're always going to take it for a test drive. I think that living together doesn't expose things that can't be discovered in a dating relationship. Will it look different if you're living together and cohabitating? Yeah, it would look a lot different. It'll expedite, it'll speed it up. But what happens in a living relationship is not Christ honoring. It's not God honoring. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that's healthy for a relationship. And many times, and Chris, I can't say this across the board. I'm just saying a lot of times when I've talked to people who are living together, who have used the term, hey, we're just going to we want to see if we can cohabitate. Usually there's an underlying issue there
Of trust.
of trust that doesn't, that's limiting them or hindering them from making a commitment. It's not where we can cohabitate. It's like there's something there, whether it's a hurt, pain from the past, whether it's a lack of trust, whatever it may be. Usually it's not whether we can cohabitate or live together. It's more because there's an issue there, an underlying issue there. Maybe they don't want to avoid a mistake that they made from the past, but in my experiences with counseling with people who've done that versus dated and then got married, the stories of success are far greater for those who did it right. Yeah. And that is that they've dated in a healthy, God-honoring way, worked on the relationship. Because if you date long enough, you will find out some things about the other person. And to me, I think it's not worth jeopardizing your marriage moving forward by living together. And I think when we do it God's way, we position ourselves to be blessed.
Yeah, and hearing the question, one of the things they talked about wanting to how you protect yourselves and stay that. Then they moved into moving together. Is that an option? Moving in together does not help with the first part of the question.
That's right.
Because you're taking away those safeguards. So I will tell you a story. Our oldest daughter and her husband, they wanted to get married. They asked us to be their accountability partners because they wanted to be pure in the relationship. And we respected that because they wanted us when they came out, hey, we will if you'll be honest with us. Mm-hmm. So when they come in, how did everything go? How did it work out? So they tried to set in place things because they understand. Also, this is my personal opinion. I'm not a big fan if someone wants to be pure in their marriage of having extremely long engagement periods.
True.
There are a lot of things like that really make it more challenging. So if you found the one you want and you know that, I think there's just some boundaries and some safeguards that you can put in place.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You have
point.
to be practical and say, okay, if we say we're wanting to finish school or whatever, okay, we love each other, but in order to stay pure till marriage, we have to not be in places alone. We don't go out in the car in a park at night alone and park. You go with people, you go in public places, you protect yourself before getting there. Because if you get there and then things get carried away, you might.
It's hard to come back from that.
It
sometimes,
is.
too.
It's hard to come back. But if you think of those things ahead of time and don't let yourself put yourself in that position, that is a way to help safeguard.
Yeah. Well, and Pastor, just to reinforce what you were saying, studies have shown now. I was reading in a non-Christian from a major news publisher. They did a study on cohabitation, and they saw that the rate for divorce is drastically higher in couples who cohabitated versus those who waited for marriage to move in together. And so that's one of the things that I think people are finding out now as they're going, oh, I thought I needed to test drive or move in to check. And what they're finding is not so much.
That's great. I
Right.
think we're first followers of Christ, and logically, if you strip Jesus and God, the Bible, all that away, it makes sense. Let's cohabitate, try it. But God didn't design it that way. It's biblically not correct, and God has a plan. And so we're first followers of Christ before we are a fiance or a spouse, and doing it God's way when it logically doesn't make sense. I'm a very logical, practical person. So I can see their point. Well, that maybe they came from parents who argued and bigger. I don't want to do that. But God's design is, he designed it. He knows it's the perfect plan. And so I think when we get away from that, being a Christ follower first is where we mess up in a lot of areas in
Yeah,
our
because
life.
he designed the plan, but he
Right.
also designed us.
Right.
So he knows what's good for us. So he
Right.
doesn't tell us not to have sex
Right.
outside of marriage to take something away from us.
Mm-hmm.
He knows the damage that it can do to us. So he's protecting us.
Exactly.
He's given us one of the best gifts you can give to a married couple, and he's trying to protect us with that.
Very good.
Good.
Okay. Well, now this is the part in the podcast where the questions level up a little bit. It's about to get a rated R for real. And so let's start with this. And there were quite a few questions from people going, hey, what can I do? What can I not do? What does the Bible say about? And so I'll ask it this way. What is allowed or not allowed in the bedroom?
I'm going to start, and then I'm going to turn it to the professionals. This morning, I was thinking about what we're doing here this afternoon, and the word the Bible uses is the marriage bed is undefiled. I'm a dictionary person, so I looked that up. Undefiled means, or defiled means to make dirty, to make it foul or unclean. So I think we start there. God says what you do in the marriage bed is not dirty. It's not unclean. We talked about it at lunch. You grow up in a Christian home. It's bad. Don't do this. All you hear is no, 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 no. And then you get married and all of a sudden 24 hours later, it's okay. So God said the marriage bed is not dirty. It's not polluted. It's clean. So
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
You know, and one thing I've learned, God is very good. If he doesn't want us to do something, he's pretty good about putting it in the word.
exactly.
You know, and he's very clear that he says, okay, that sex needs to be between a husband and a wife. It needs not to include animals, and it needs not to include other people. And he pretty much stops right there. So it leaves you to think, well, can I or can't I? That's an interesting discussion that you need to have with your spouse.
Well, and a lot of times we come into it with filters. Filters from either our upbringing, if our parents were very hush-hush, didn't talk about it, or kind of gave you the impression that it's dirty, it's wrong, or filters from if you've been abused. There could be that, or church. You've heard in church, you know, sex is bad, dirty, whatever. And so we all have these filters that we come into a relationship with in this area. And if you have been taught that, say, oral or anal or any other kind of sex outside of missionary is wrong or perverted, that is deeply ingrained. And what I would suggest is if your spouse is wanting to experiment with things and you're uncomfortable with it, first ask yourself, why am I uncomfortable? What has happened? Look back at your past. What my upbringing, what I've been taught. Why do I feel uncomfortable about this? Pray about it. We had sex issues for the first 19 years of our marriage. We've been married 41 years this summer. But the first 19 years, I would have killed for a podcast like this because I thought I was the only one that had these issues. But if you think back and why am I not wanting to do this? Pray about it. I used to pray all the time, Lord, please give me a better sex drive. I need a sex drive. It's okay to pray about things. If your arm was broken, you'd pray about that. God gave us our sexuality. And if you're having issues there, first go to God and pray and ask him to show you. He will. And
He designed it.
He designed it, exactly. And that doesn't mean that it has to be missionary, just because the word missionary.
It's a biblical
Spiritual.
word. Yeah.
Right here, Steve, tonight, we're going to be a missionary. Oh, Jesus.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, if that's your thing. But open yourself up to experiment. But it has to be willing.
Yes.
The other spouse cannot, and I cannot enforce that enough, cannot try to force that on you. The one thing that happens, if you feel forced, then you start feeling like something's wrong with me, or it can go back to an abusive situation that you had. So it can never be forced. Now you can talk, and the one who's wanting to experiment, tell them why. Why are you wanting to experiment? What, did you see something, hear something? What gave you the idea? But it's all about communication. But the way I feel about as far as right and wrong, if both are willing and it's not being forced, then anything is okay. And I have gotten to the point is I'll pretty much try anything once. And if I don't like it, then that's the last
do it.
time.
Exactly.
And don't get so serious about it. If you try something, it doesn't work, or you don't like it.
we've laughed.
We have started laughing in the middle of us. Okay, this is over. The
I
mood
should have
is
known I
gone.
couldn't bend that way. Something like that.
We're too old for that.
Exactly. And sex should be fun. It should never feel forced. It should never feel like I have to do this for my spouse. It's a give and a take. You give and you take. And sometimes maybe one particular thing isn't my favorite, but if he truly likes it, I'm going to do it. Maybe not every time, but I'm going to do it because I love him and I want him to feel fulfilled. And he's going to do the same for me. If he knows it's something that I don't particularly love, but I'll do, he's not going to ask me to do it every single time.
And if I know it's something that she doesn't want to do at all,
Right.
then I won't bring it up at all. It's
Because the
different.
whole point of sex is to feel loved. I want to feel loved like nobody else can do for me like he can. And he needs the same from me. And so that's the whole point. If you're thinking of sex as just getting to the finish line, then your goals are wrong. That's not the point of sex. Of course, we all like to get to the finish line, but it doesn't have to happen every time. And that's not the main goal. The main goal is I'm going to feel close. I'm going to feel loved. I'm going to show my spouse how much I love him or her, and I'm going to make them feel loved.
It's a deeper intimacy when you're
Exactly.
going through that, because yes, you can talk, yes, you can do a lot of things, but as the Bible says, the two becoming one.
Right.
Is during that time, and it's something that you can't replicate in other ways. And God has graciously given us a gift that He allows us to see what works for us, because we're wired differently than
right.
other people, and those things are going to be different.
And I would say too, so here's what we've established in this question. It's pretty broad.
Yeah.
The marriage bed, the relationship's pretty broad. The no-nos are limited, one or two, right? That's a beautiful thing because when you've been married for a long period of time, obviously the longer you're married, you know, sex can become routine like anything else. And I think it's good to add variety.
Yes.
Our not just variety of how we have sex, but I think the deeper level of intimacy is important because that's what we've experienced and you guys have as well. So I think it's rather broad. Doubling down on what they've already mentioned earlier, here's the way I look at it, okay? I do not want to do anything that dishonors Marty.
That's right.
And if I impose my will on her, which I'm asking her or I'm forcing her or I'm making her feel guilty if she doesn't do something that brings pleasure to me, that's dishonoring. And I think most of us who got married said something, we promised to love, honor, and cherish. And I think we're dishonoring our spouse whenever we impose things on them. How do we do that, Chris? Whenever we make them feel guilty.
Yeah.
Not doing something. It's your marital spousal duty. No, it's not. Now, sex is important, yes, but how you have sex is left up to each couple. And that's why this whole issue of communication is huge, that we communicate. It's okay to go, baby, I don't like that, or I do like that. I never want to dishonor Marty. Sex, at the end of the day, is for pleasure, not just mine. And that's the thing. If I just think it's all about what brings me pleasure, that's not helping. That's not the way it's supposed to be. It is supposed to be mutually pleasurable for both of us, fulfilling for both of us.
right.
Now, there are times when we have sex and we're like, okay, I'm glad you felt better because I didn't. And we're like, just thank you,
Don't
baby.
know why you patted my back, but hey, that's okay.
Sometimes you just do your spouse a favor and say,
Yeah.
thank you very much. I appreciate that. But anyway, I digress. So anyway, it is this understanding of it. It's mutually pleasurable and enjoyable for both. And I think couples need to talk about that. I think that only strengthens the relationship. And at the end of the day, I don't want to do anything that makes her feel uncomfortable. And I would also add to that, when you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and there are other verses talking about love, love, love. Love does not seek its own will. Love is not self-serving. Love is not about me. Love is about us. And I think that that's true in the marriage bed, where it's like sometimes we can become pretty selfish when it comes to intimacy. I want it this way. This is how I want it. I want it every night. I want it early, often, and all the time. That's not realistic, and that's not healthy. So I think because I love her, if I'm doing anything that makes her feel uncomfortable, I want to give her the freedom to share that too.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to make her feel bad because she doesn't want to do that, or I don't want to do something. By the way, there's nothing that I can think of that I never wanted to do, but
Let's not get personal.
let's not get personal. Anyway, so
That's for us over here.
so that's honoring and love. I think those things are key, but it's broad, it's wide open, and I think it's healthy for couples to have these conversations.
There was one question here when a woman, she asked about something her husband's wanting to do that she's uncomfortable with. And then she ended it by saying, I'm going to get emotional. Am I broken? And I think a lot of wives and possibly husbands, I don't know, but I speak from the wife position. So they feel if a husband is pressing for something that they're uncomfortable with, if your wife is questioning herself, am I broken? That's not where you want her to be.
Right.
If she is feeling that way, she's not going to be open to intimacy. She's not going to be vulnerable to you. And it broke my heart because I have been there. I have been there and I felt like I was broken. And he didn't realize what he was doing. He was young and dumb.
As we all were.
That's right.
And he admits it now. It's like, but I felt for years, he was always like, oh, he'll see a doctor thing. Oh, well, maybe you need this. Maybe you need that.
I spent a lot of time trying to fix her, and she wasn't broken, but I didn't know.
And so for this woman who feels that way, you are not broken.
Right.
Let me just tell you, you are not broken. There are so many women that feel that way, and it's because of what you're feeling pressure to do. And I would say, like I said earlier, think about it. Why am I uncomfortable with this? But at the end of the day, if you are uncomfortable about it, you should not feel pressure to do it.
Right.
And your husband should not be pressuring you to do that because that's not loving and that's not honoring.
That's right.
That's
good.
great.
So, Lavina, I'm just going to ask you a little bit more. Speaking to that woman, what encouragement or advice would you give her if she's in this place? She's going, thank you for saying that. I'm not broken. What would you encourage her to do as a next step? And then, Darren, I'm going to ask you to speak to the husband in that situation after.
Good. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I would say, first off, I would look at myself. Why am I resistant to this? And I know what it is. So it's, why am I resistant? Okay. And then once you get that answer, is it something I would be willing to try? Yes or no? And ask yourself those and be honest with yourself. But then also talk to your husband.
Good.
Talk to him. Tell him how you're feeling and why I feel this way about that. And read books, learn about yourself. if you're having issues there, learn about your body, learn about sex. The thing for me that helped is I learned the importance of sex to him. And I was thinking, our marriage was really good. Our marriage was, I thought, oh, everything's snapping. We have this one little issue here of sex, but everything else is great. And that's truly how I felt. Everything else in our relationship was working. But once I realized, because we came to, and we'll talk about that later, but to a place where we almost divorced, it was like, okay, this was a bigger deal than I thought it was. Just because I don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not a big deal for him. And so if I don't understand why my spouse feels passionately about something, I need to find out why. I need to talk to him. I need to get his perspective. And this is the thing about talking about sex. A lot of times couples are more than willing to do it, but they're not willing to talk about it.
Good.
And I know it's because there's egos involved. There's men are very sensitive. They want to think they're God's gift to women. And I understand this.
Why'd you point to me at that? I don't understand.
You're okay, darling. But you have to be teachable. You have to hear your spouse. You have to hear their heart. And you have to both, and this is for both husbands and wives, we have to not take criticism, because you don't ever want to criticize your spouse in this area, but say, honey, I feel that for me, this would really help make me feel fulfilled, or whatever you're feeling. But you have to feel free to talk about it. If you can't talk about sex, you're never going to resolve your issues around sex.
Good.
Yeah. And if I were to talk to the husband, one of the things that really, looking back, that I saw the problem, I had very unrealistic expectations. So what I would do is I believed I loved my wife. I desired her. I wanted to have sex with her. And she didn't always want to have sex. So the way I thought of it is, if I love her and I want to have sex with her because I desire her, and she doesn't want it, does she love me? Why doesn't she feel the same way that I do and respond in the same way? Well, looking back to it, I was an idiot and I was stupid. I didn't know any better. So we would have conversations every 3 months about sex coming up. Hey, we're not doing it well. Yes, maybe we need to do this. We had kids too started. So that's a whole other issue about that. But then, so she, all of a sudden, every time I kept bringing up sex every 3 months, anytime the word sex would come up, she'd tear up. Yeah. Why? Because I kept talking to her about her problem. It wasn't her problem. It was my problem, because my expectations for how she should respond, what she should be doing, were totally inaccurate, because I never once really sat down and talked at the level of detail that she said. One of the common themes that we've talked about here that'll be all through the questions, it's amazing. Communications can be a big part of everything.
That's right. Okay, so you mentioned in there the hurdle having kids can be when trying to be intimate with each other. This is one of our questions. Hey, me and my spouse, we're trying, we got a 2-year-old, we got a 3-year-old. Do you have any advice?
It will get better.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Time.
Yeah.
I remember Lavina and I were laughing about it at lunch, just going, everybody wants a piece of me. Good Lord. My kids want me to hold me. My husband I'm just trying to live and survive and sleep. And
get a bath.
It's a real thing. I just want to go to the bathroom by myself. It's a real thing. And can I just speak to the husbands? Because typically, maybe I'm old school, but typically it is the mom that bears the brunt of the time with the kids and the energy and stuff. I think your generation is changing that somewhat, but just know it's nothing personal. And them stepping in, we have friends that the husband wouldn't lift a finger. I mean, not anything. He'd sit in his recliner, go, baby, can you bring me some tea? As he's watching TV and she's watching 12 kids, and it's just crazy. But knowing that that's a real thing and stepping in to help was like, that spoke volumes to me. My love language is acts of service. He'd unload the dishwasher or load it, and he didn't do it because, I'm going to get lucky tonight, because you can see through that. But really just stepping in and helping, because that is a real thing, and it is a season. It will pass. Yeah. So hang in there.
And I'll let Darren Lavina speak to this because you guys can offer some practical guidelines too. But at those ages where you have kids at home, young kids at home, and life and busyness happen, you really do have to be intentional. And you whether it's, we'll talk about planning in just a moment, but you sometimes you got to plan for intimacy, and I don't mean plan for sex. I mean plan for connection with your spouse. Whether that's at night, kids are going to bed, you're too tired to do anything, you don't want to, but you're sitting and you're talking. You have to double down on that, because your marriage will suffer without that connection point. And so I do remember, and Marty is and was an amazing mom, stay-at-home mom. And there are so many challenges facing young couples today where both spouses work. You have single moms, single dads, and you really got to double down on the connection point. And so I think one of the things that we had to do, and we were intentional somewhat, we got more and more intentional the older we got, is really doubling down on intimacy as far as our connection point, whether it's a date night, whatever we can
Connecting.
define. It is
Like
connecting
you said,
point. Yeah.
it wasn't always sex. It was looking at each other and talking and communicating, and that's so important.
And you guys have got some great ideas for some
For the planning,
planning,
Well,
right?
we've done some things.
By
yes.
the way, what are y'all doing Saturday at 2?
Yeah.
I'll call you at 2:30.
What we did when our kids were little is once they go to bed, we would go to, because you couldn't leave them, so we would go into our bathroom, draw a hot bath, bubbles from the whole thing. We would sit facing one another and talk, put on candles, soft music, and talk. I needed that after a day with the kids, after everything going on. I needed to reconnect with him and remind myself that I was a woman as well as a mom. And so that time of connection, like Marty said, was important for me to get to the next level, because
He just kind of endured it.
yeah, he was like, okay, how long?
I did initially. Initially, I did. You're right.
Yeah, but we'd reheat the water, if it got cool. But then after I felt connection with him again, then we moved it to the bedroom. And so having that time, and we would schedule, okay, how about Thursday night? I don't have anything going, let's do it Thursday.
No kids
And
things
I
going on.
know that doesn't sound sexy. That's our society thinks everything, like in a movie.
Has
you
to be
just
spontaneous.
Yeah, you fall and, up against a wall and everything, and it's all crazy. But that's not real life.
Right.
Real life is scheduling, and scheduling can be good, especially for a woman, because like you said, when he would come up, start kissing my neck and all this stuff, I'm thinking, oh gosh, I've got this to do. And that's what's going through my head while he's thinking nothing but the bedroom. But if I know, okay, we're going to do this Thursday, then I can get myself in this space. And I know the men are going, well, shouldn't I get you in the space? No, a woman has, I'm sorry.
Personal. Was just,
Just for all the guys out there, the woman's sex organ is her brain.
Up here.
Right.
Okay,
That's
a lot of
right.
people think doing all that. It's not. It's her brain.
Because then if I know that we're going to be doing that tonight, I'll listen to sexy music. Like I love 80s, so I'll listen to the ballad
Everybody's
80s. That's right. And I'll think about it and I'll plan. And so I can get myself so that by the time we're there, I'm ready and I'm in the moment, rather than him just surprising me with it. And that's not to say that you can't ever be spontaneous, but
Right.
on an ongoing basis, especially with children,
in that season. It's
and
To
yeah,
be intentional,
You have
you've
to
got
be
do it.
intentional.
And I will tell you something. I just started off. You're right. We're in the bathtub. Okay, I'm doing my doing everything,
Yeah,
my
due
duty up front,
diligence.
so
That
she
is
can come in
patient.
and do
It
it.
says patient
That's
first
right.
for a reason.
But what I found is, women need connection to be open for sex. Men need sex to be open for connection. But what I learned and what I've changed is I have gotten to the point, because some of those habits have carried on for years and years and still going on today, that now we'll sit there before anything. We might sit outside and talk. We might do anything for a couple hours and all that, and connecting, because I've gotten where I like that as well. Now, that doesn't mean there's not spontaneous things where something comes up and all of a sudden, okay, let's go. But it's, no pun intended. But it's and when we were dating, when the kids were older and they could stay home by themselves, we could do date nights. We used to go to Costco because we had no money. We would go in, get the $1.50 hot dog and a Coke, and we'd go do samples, and we'd walk around and talk. And it was great.
because all we could afford was the sitter.
Yeah.
We couldn't afford the
So-
dates.
So the whole
Right.
thing is not about what you do, it's that you do it together and connect.
so good.
Because a wife needs that.
That's a great date
That's great.
idea. Costco, and then go parking.
And then go,
Also, I throw out another one. Gallery furniture. What?
Baby, you can't
Mattress
tell them
Mac,
we
who
did
is
that.
that?
Gallery Furniture, not just Matt.
I'm never buying a mattress from there
There's a
again.
place at Gallery. There's a
didn't
place
say
at
that.
Gallery
I said
Furniture.
Frito. No, seriously, downtown church, we would go and they had a kids' play area. I think IKEA had one as well.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had no money. We'd walk around and they gave out free cookies. And it was like you said, it's not what you did, it's
You're
that you did
together.
it together.
That's right.
So the
There you go,
The,
free
story
date.
there
That was
was
free.
you got a free child care at Gallery Furniture.
That's right.
Hopefully they did a background check. I don't know. By the
Yeah.
way, we're doing date night tonight,
Absolutely.
Friday night. Just
That's
date
right.
night out, right? Parent night out. So
Very
Great,
good.
great time to have a little intimacy time, talking, connecting with your spouse.
please go off church grounds. If you
That's, yeah. Go to Costco.
Yeah, Costco.
Okay, so I think we've done a good job of addressing as well as we can what's allowed in the bedroom. Wild card question. One of these was, hey, what am I allowed to do when my spouse is not in the bedroom with me? And it's a question about masturbation. And they say, if I'm thinking about them, is it okay? Or is it okay, period?
I'll dive into that.
We'll let you.
Again, as I share a story, we need to understand that this area of sexuality between two married couples is broad. Okay. I heard a story about a guy who stood among a group of pastors and told them that masturbation was a sin. And he had someone that came up to him following that statement and said, "You have just destroyed something very special to me." And so the guy found out his story, and come to find out, this man was once incarcerated, and he and his wife, the only way that they could share a moment of intimacy was that they would call one another. He was incarcerated. He would call her on the phone, and there was a set time once a week where they would call, and as they talked, they would masturbate. Okay. And so here's a thought with this, okay? That's a story of two people who are physically separated. My question is, what do you do if your spouse is incapacitated, paralyzed, unable to move? Does that mean that intimacy is some kind of sexual release is never going to happen again? Again, if we understand Scripture, and my belief is that this area of sexuality is rather broad, I think it goes back to what we've been saying. If you have two adults that are consenting and both are in agreement, and our minds are not fantasizing about someone else, but the person we're married to is done under this umbrella. I don't think Scripture says anything against that.
That's right.
And I think it's broad. I think it's wide open. And our first immediate pushback may be shock and awe, but the reality is we can't just say, all right, here's the rule, here's the statement that we're making, and it's wrong. Masturbation is always wrong. I think that we need every story, every situation is unique. Mm-hmm. And the story I just gave you about the person in prison or health issues, God forbid that something like that should limit that. I don't think there's anything wrong with something like that, and I certainly don't think anything is in Scripture reveals that as wrong, sinful, or ungodly.
That's right.
Now, if our fantasies move from our spouse to some other area, that's a different story.
Absolutely.
Anybody else want to?
I think if it is a substitute for true intimacy with your spouse, you're not asking
good
for
way to say it.
something that they need to be giving you. You're just, for whatever reason, trying to fulfill your own needs. I think you need to ask yourself that as well. So,
Yeah, if you think of someone, maybe a spouse is sick or can't do that, there are ways that they can participate. Maybe they could be there, maybe take their clothes off, maybe touch it right there, because they can do it together. Remember, intimacy is about the two of them being together, whether distance, in the example you gave, or in the same room. The thing that I personally would watch out for is masturbation by yourself without anyone there, and you saying, but I'm thinking about my wife.
Right.
You might that first time or a second time, but take it from experience to someone who's struggled with porn for over 20 years, it will not stay there.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing to do. So it's in the context. I like the way you said it. Each situation is looked at differently. Just like the Holy Spirit tells you, some people can go to certain
Right.
types of movies, other people can't because he knows how he's wired us and what's good for us.
Sure.
I think people can work together in the relationship and still have that intimacy in difficult circumstances.
Because when it comes to masturbation, it's not done with an empty head. There's thoughts going back to what you'd mentioned. Okay, so I think that's the critical question to answer as far as what goes through our minds. Okay, if our spouse is with us, if they're it's this intimacy that's happening as not awkward but as unique as it may be, that's one thing. But if we're masturbating by ourselves and our thought life, and we could be having sex with our spouse and our fantasy or our minds go somewhere else, that's very unhealthy. And I would say that would be a strong marker there that we need to stop, take a pause, and pray about and reflect on. So, because that's not healthy for the relationship.
Okay. So in the Bible, it says that anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. This question says, can you please expand on this, clarify? There are many divorcees and remarried couples who are struggling with this. Are remarried couples committing adultery? How could a divorced person ever find love again?
Great question. Chris, when you read that in Mark's gospel, it's I think it's Mark chapter 10. Mark expounds on that just a bit. And because it does say that a man commits adultery, or someone who is divorced or remarried commits adultery, Jesus expounds on that, and he talks about how he says that Moses allowed a certificate of divorce because your hearts were hardened. Now, so when we look at that through the other Gospels, it's clear that Jesus is saying the law, this is what the law said. And Moses allowed that because of the hardness of your heart. I feel my personal experience has been when after the cross and the crucifixion, grace entered. Up until that point, Jesus was accurately saying the law declares that if you are married and you get a divorce, then you commit adultery. But post-crucifixion, grace entered that. Chris, it's like this. Jesus is saying, this is the preferred way. This is the way it should have been. But because of the hardness of your heart, now we're under grace. And I think that's an important thing to realize, because grace changes everything. It doesn't mean that divorce doesn't impact homes and families, because certainly it did. The point I think Jesus is making, where we stand right now, is that Jesus doesn't throw someone away or discard them because of a divorce, whether it was your fault or the fault of your spouse. Think about this. David had multiple wives and multiple concubines, but
It's not advisable.
it's not advisable, but he was a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
And I think not saying is what David did was right. I'm just saying that if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and you see that passage of Scripture, I know that my confidence is that Jesus was speaking pre-law, because the law was in effect. After the crucifixion, grace ushered in. And God's preference is that no one get a divorce. But divorce doesn't disqualify you from being used of God. Divorce doesn't mean that you're permanently marked. Jesus provides latitude because of the hardness of your heart. Mm-hmm. And it may not have been my heart that was hard. It may have been the heart of my spouse. For whatever reason, that's another story. But I think divorce, as bad as it is and unhealthy as it is for homes and families and marriages, it doesn't disqualify us in any way from being used of God.
Good. Well, thank y'all. Well, we have one more question that we want to get into here, and it's phrased this way: how do I get over a spouse's infidelity? And so the question here, if my spouse has been unfaithful, how can trust be restored? Can it be? And what strategy or wisdom would y'all give?
Well, we can definitely say,
Speak to that.
that yes, it can be restored. 21 years ago, I had an affair. Okay, so it was, we thought, shortly before our 20th
Right.
anniversary. And a lot of it stemmed from the sex problems that we had before. And I cheated on her. We almost didn't get back from that.
Well, and you built up inside a resentment toward me because of our sex problems, because he didn't feel like I wanted it enough, because of all these things that we didn't talk about
That's
well
right.
enough.
It stewed. And what I built in my mind, because I never imagined doing that, I built up on my mind that Lavina made me do this because I was telling her the problem and she wasn't hearing me, because I couldn't take it in my heart that I was doing this. So that's how I deflected it.
So when I found out about the affair, of course, it's like a knife to the gut. It's horrible. It's devastating. My life just instantly imploded. But he was out of town at the time when I discovered. And so I did a lot of praying that day. And I was like, our kids were in junior high at the time. And I was like, do I pack up our kids, move back to Oklahoma with my family? Well, I mean, all these things are going through my head. And I'm praying, God, what do I do? Because I had no idea. Because we had some issues. And I had asked him at one point a few weeks before this, I said, babe, is everything all right? Do you love me? And he said, he hesitated. And that's when I got scared. And he said, I love you, but I'm not in love with you.
But I may not be. Yeah, something like that.
No, you said just like that. I remember. It's here. So we were going to counseling. So we went to counseling. And during the counseling sessions, Darren's a very easygoing, happy guy, you know. But during the sessions, I could feel he had a wall up between he and the counselor. He wasn't being himself. And so the way I discovered this is I was laying in bed thinking about it. And I thought, he's not trying to decide, you know, if we can make this work. He's trying to decide if he wants to make this work. And so I was trying to call him. He wouldn't answer his phone. So I was looking on the computer to try to find what hotel he was in because it was a work thing. Couldn't find where he was, but I found a lot of emails. And that was a God thing because he's a computer whiz. He can lock up anything. I can barely turn a computer on. But I found them and I spent the entire night reading them. And so back to the day I'm deciding what to do. It's like, okay, Lord, I could take up the kids and go. Divorce is always an option. Even biblically, I have the right to divorce him. But I said, we have 19 years together. We have kids together. I am going to do whatever it takes to see if I can get my marriage to work. Then if we do end up divorcing, okay, then I could look back saying, I did all that I could do. And I would feel okay with that. So I called him and I was going to wait till he got home, but I don't have a poker face or voice. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, do you love her? And there was a dead pause. And he's like, I think I do. It's like, okay, you need to come home. And he's like, oh, I can't. I've got work. I said, you need to come home. But he said he couldn't. So I called our pastor. We lived in California at the time and called our pastor and talked to him. And he said, he needs to come home. I'm like, yeah, I know. But so I had a few days to pray.
I came home that day.
You came home the next day. But so when he came home, he came in and again, I mean, he was hard. I have never seen him before or since like this. He was hard and I was crying. Of course, I was crying and asking questions and he would barely answer me. And finally I screamed at him, why are you being such a cold-hearted bee? Beep. Yeah, beep. Exactly. And he broke. He started crying. And then we started talking and we went to counseling. And this time he was open. He was telling the truth. So we went to counseling. And to make a long story short, there was a lot of things that had to be done. He had to regain trust. And the question, can trust be rebuilt? Yes, it can, but it takes time. And it takes the one who did the trespassing. They have to be completely humble and be like, yep, I screwed up. And yes, he could say, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. No matter what's going on in your marriage, cheating is never okay. That is never okay. So I told him, I said, you cannot talk to her anymore. I want you to call her and tell her that you are going to make this work with your wife and I'm going to listen. So he did. And I told him before, I said, she's going to try to say, oh, but I love you and all this. He said, oh, I don't think she will. I said, yes, she will. Sure enough, she did. But he called it off. No more talking to her. And I said, you have to call me from a landline, not your phone. I want to know where you are. And he said, yes, I'll do that. And I got to say, this man did everything right from that point forward. He earned my trust very quickly because he did not try to defend himself. He knew he was wrong. He admitted he was wrong.
He owned it.
He owned it. And it made me feel, you'd think, even though I was deeply crushed, him owning it like that was like, okay, maybe we have a chance. Maybe we have a chance to make this work. And so by him owning it, anything that I felt like I needed, like if I asked questions about what happened between them, he would tell me. Anything I asked him, he would do. And he earned my trust back. And then I had my part to do too. I had to forgive.
Right.
And let me tell you, forgiveness is a process. It's not okay, I'm going to forgive you and it's all good. No, that pain would hit me and that betrayal, all those things would hit me. And I'd say, no, Lord, you're helping me forgive. And it was every 15 minutes, I may have to do that.
Yeah.
But it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Good.
And so then it was every hour I'd have to do that. Then maybe twice a day. And then I realized after a few months, wow, that pain wasn't hitting me anymore. He was doing his part. He was being honest. He was being trustworthy. He was doing everything that I felt I needed to regain trust. And I was doing my part to forgive and have God help me to forgive. And I mean, I'll be honest, there were times we'd be making love and I would start crying in the middle of it, thinking, did he do this with her? But I had to work through that and I had to forgive those things. But if you're willing, and this is the only way a marriage works after a betrayal, you both have to want it to work.
Yeah.
You both have to be willing to do whatever it takes to make this work. And he was, and I was. And within just probably 6 months, our pastor at our church at the time was so floored by the change in us. He asked us to do a marriage ministry at the church. And it was a God thing. And both of us were willing to submit to God, submit to one another. So you can get past a betrayal, an infidelity in the marriage. However, it takes work. But now we have talked so many times and we look back and we say, wow, what Satan meant for evil,
Right.
God has turned it around for good. And I tell you, I can't say I'm glad it happened, but since it did, our marriage has never been stronger. The last 21 years has been so much better than the first 19 because there's a bond here that we know we've gone through the fire
Yeah.
and we've made it. And we think, thank God all the time what we could have lost
If you'd have quit.
if we had quit.
But we don't say we're glad it happened, but I will say we're thankful that we're able to use it because we've told that story to a lot of people that we've talked to over time who went through that and we've seen it help people. So the fact that we did go through, because obviously it wasn't my finest hour, but I don't care because of where we are now and what it does. Because the thing that you look for in any type of situation where there's a betrayal is hope. Is there any hope for me to have the relationship that I want? And I just want to say up here, there is hope.
Yeah.
There is hope, but both of you have to want it. If one doesn't want it, I'm sorry, one person can't carry the load. It's got to be both, but I promise you there is hope.
Thank y'all
that's
for sharing
beautiful.
that.
That's great.
Just the level of respect for someone that owns the hard times they've gone through and owns what their part was, just the level of respect goes up. So thank y'all for sharing that.
Beautiful story of redemption. Chris, I would just say this. My hope is that today has provided hope for couples, for us to be able to take some things that sometimes we deal with in private and bring it out in the open.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of things emotionally, physically, in areas of intimacy that we feel and we kind of keep it hidden. And one of the best things that we can do is to share that with our spouse and to really know you're not alone. Obviously, from the number of questions, and we had more questions submitted regarding the issue than I think in any other previous weeks, that tells us that this matters to people. It's important to people.
Yeah, that's right.
And the beauty of this, and Darren Lavina's story is amazing because it is a story of restoration and redemption. And I hope that those who are listening to this podcast will walk away with that because I can promise you there's families and there's marriages in our church, people that we know who are hurting, who are frustrated, who are navigating some of these challenges of intimacy. And to know that God really does care about that, just about he cares about every area of our life. And it's okay to have these conversations. This is a healthy conversation we need to have. So, Darren, Lavina, thank you for sharing your story. And I think it's just encouragement to us that, and other couples, right? No matter where you are, whether there's infidelity in your past or not, the good news is that God has us at a place, but it can always get better. Our relationships, our marriage can thrive, they can flourish. And that's what we want to do. We want to help couples establish that and connection point.
Yeah, and we're really excited too because we have Dave and Ashley
Yes.
Willis coming
That's right.
Saturday the 23rd, I believe.
Yes.
That's right.
23rd, and they're going to be talking about
Sex.
Even more than we
more
did.
so than
Yes,
we did. They
they're
have
good.
Well, they do the naked. Is it naked,
Naked
marriage?
podcast.
There you go.
Yeah. They're physically not naked on
Well,
the
yeah.
podcast.
Good,
Yes,
good.
that's
Yeah.
what it is.
Well, and the thing
Clothing
is,
is not optional. It must be more, right?
Yeah.
if you struggle with this area, and a lot of couples do, don't feel like you're the one and only.
Right.
We have talked to so many couples that struggle in this area
That don't talk about
that
it.
don't talk about it. Yeah. Get help. If you can't talk it out with each other, don't go 19 years like we did. Get help.
Good.
There's the podcast or the workshop coming
Family
up.
conference, yeah.
There's books. There's the one we found that's really good is called Sheet Music by Dr. Kevin Lehman. This is an awesome Christian book on sex in a marriage.
And it deals with a lot of the very practical,
Very
Yes.
practical.
can I ask that question? Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Lavina, people are going to want to, guys are going to want to know, does it have pictures?
Maybe a drawing or two.
Okay, it's not a how-to, but
But
Thank you for clarifying.
Great.
Yeah,
that is a great book.
It is a good resource. And like you said, the 23rd, if you submitted some of these questions, please come. If you didn't and you're
Yeah.
thinking some of these questions, they're going to hit it straight on. I mean, they don't play. Saturday the 23rd, please sign up for our family conference. It's going to be really good. And they travel with Jimmy Evans Ministry EXO conference. I'm sure you've heard of that. So we're very honored they're coming and just very blessed that they could come and join us that Saturday.
absolutely.
Come on. Wow. What a time. Awesome. Well, Pastor, would you just remind everybody that we're in our Family Matters series, and what are we talking about this week coming up?
Yeah, this Sunday's going to be great. Marty and I are going to be doing a tag team. We're going to be just sharing some parenting principles. So this Sunday, we're going to be diving into the issue of parenting. We're actually going to look at the accounts of creation, Adam and Eve, and we're going to see our Heavenly Father, and we see from the Heavenly Father how He interacted with Adam and Eve.
With his
and-
kids.
With his kids. And that's going to help us as parents. And so we're going to come away with some parenting principles. This Sundays, I'm really excited about it. Not only because we're going to be hitting on the topic that parents, grandparents deal with, but also Marty's going to be joining me. It's going to be a fun.
So I can
fun Sunday.
clarify all of these statements that he throws out and that everybody laughs and rolls their eyes because they know it ain't true. But no, we ain't got time for that on Sunday. But.
Very
So
good.
PC, let me just say this. So parenting, the following Pastor Quentin will be talking about boundaries.
Good.
And then following that, Pastor Daniel is going to be talking about finances. And then, of course, we're going to wrap it up with Dave and Ashley Willis
On a Sunday
on
morning.
a Sunday morning. And then Easter Sunday's the following Sunday. So
Wow.
March is going to be an incredible
March Madness.
Yeah, that's right.
March craziness is right. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank y'all so much for being here today. And if you're listening, we invite you to come check out what God's doing in real life.
Absolutely.